I was hoping you'd take me back to the old TBS tapings and just take me through like a day of what time you get there, how you'd learn of the format, how many interviews backstage you might do for the whole gamut of what a day taping would be like.
Yeah, well, and I'll just to put it in perspective for your audience, um, I'll broaden it just a bit. People have to. I want them to understand what our schedule potentially could be like back then. For example, in 1986, I had 454 matches. So yeah, so if you do the math
Wow.
on that, that's more than one a day, right? Well, TBS played into that. What I mean by that is, we taped, we did two syndicated shows called Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling and Worldwide Wrestling. So we had to tape those shows, and that was always done one night of the week somewhere, remotely, in a town somewhere. And you could easily have a couple matches that night for television, and maybe two or three interviews that night or what, right? And then TBS, we had to be in the studio at 8 a.m. on Saturday mornings. So no matter where we were on Friday night, you're either driving late into Atlanta or you're flying in late to Atlanta. So you could be at the studio by 8 a.m. And we filmed 3 hours. Because back in those days, it was a 2 hour show that went on air that Saturday night at 6:05 Eastern, and then a 1 hour show on Sunday night. I think at 7:05 or 6:05 or 7:05. So it was possible to have a couple matches on that Saturday morning while you were taping, and again, maybe another two or three interviews, and it was a small studio, but a very lively crowd. It was fun to film in. It looked bigger than life on television, but it was a very, very small crowd. And then it was often that we would leave the television tapings. We might drive to Columbus, Georgia, and have an afternoon Saturday matinee match. Come back to the Omni in Atlanta and have a show that night. Drive to Asheville, North Carolina, and have a Sunday afternoon match, and go back to Charlotte and have a Sunday night match in Charlotte. I mean, that was a typical weekend. It was pretty grueling. Lot of work.
Could you tell me more about, I mean, as I would know it, the gorilla position, how the WWF terms it? That you have a producer, you have several people just before you go to the curtain. What would WCW be? Excuse me, the NWA be like? And would they be any different to the TV tapings?
Yeah, essentially, the man who pushes the pencil, in other words, what we would call the booker, typically would sit in that position. We didn't know it was that back then. I mean, we just there's a booker. He's in front of he's sitting in front of the monitors, and there's a couple other assistants or whatever, Grizzly Smith or other guys who Gene Anderson, who might cue you when it's time to go out for your match or go out for your interview and that sort of thing. And of course, a good part of my career, Dusty Rhodes was the booker. And so he essentially sat in that position. It wasn't often that I would go into that room or hang out in there. I wasn't that guy. I would just wait till it was, my time to go out and perform and do what I had to do. But yeah, it was pretty, so I guess you say different terminology back then. But nevertheless, the same kind of setup or the same format to filming. Jim Crockett Jr. typically would be there and be in that room as well, or in front of those monitors as well. So whoever's kind of running, whoever had the book, whoever's kind of running, you might say running the show. I mean, back in the days of WCW, Jim Herd and some of the other guys, would be there as well.
I will be asking about Jim Herd in a minute, but before I before I do, and I ask this facetiously, how was catering backstage?
Uh, how was what?
Well, there you go.
No, I knew exactly what you asked. There was no such thing as catering. Like, again, let me illustrate the picture. We were responsible essentially back in those days for pretty much anything and everything, getting ourselves to the town, um, providing our own food for ourselves, like for real, legit. There was no. I mean, I used to pack a cooler. The guys used to tease me, used to joke. I used to pack this red and white igloo cooler with, all my food and Gatorade and everything that I would bring to the towns, whether it was TV tapings or anything. Every night, I just packed a cooler. A lot of guys would stop and grab something quick at a 7-Eleven or grab a quick meal in a restaurant or something. But there was no such thing as catering back in those days. You got there and all you were doing was, and it was it was 5-6 hours of TV taping. So if you didn't bring yourself something to eat, then you just didn't eat, Quite different, my brother.
Yeah. And one more thing about the TV studio where you recorded. I believe you had to share bathrooms with other companies around that were also using it, or am I just going crazy there? Am I misremembering?
Well, 10th, it's at the TBS studio, so 10th and Techwood, the TBS studio. So there was yeah. I mean, it was a studio. They were filming more. They'd film more than one thing in there at times, and there were different studios there in 10th and Techwood, and so yeah, that was always a possibility. Sure.